Hey, Whitewater, Micah here. Hope you had a great weekend. You might already know my good friend Chriss Brandt, but in case you don't, this is Chriss Brandt. And this month's interview, we're going to be talking with Chriss about fruitfulness, just different ways that he's seen fruit in his life. I always want to say that how much I appreciate Chriss because he was in my very first huddle that I ever ran when I didn't know what I was doing and I was making stuff up on the fly and just changing stuff around and trying to figure it out. So
yeah, I'm a survivor.
He's a survivor of my first huddle. But Chriss, let's talk a little bit about kind of both sides of that. So you were in a huddle with me.
Yes.
And we weren't even sure what we were doing. Like we didn't know. But you said that was a really fruitful time just in terms of your own spiritual life. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think there were a lot of things that were wonderful about going through huddle the first time. But I think the biggest thing for me was learning how to read Scripture differently and really paying attention to what God's saying to you through the words that you read. And that whole learning circle idea that God is speaking to you through the events in your life and the things that you read and the things that you hear was life-altering for me. So it has changed my trajectory in a dramatic way. And for those of you who've been through, through huddle, you know that the learning circle doesn't always produce a radical change. It produces a slight change. For me, it was a radical change. So,
except that I don't think that any particular time we did it there was a radical change.
Right.
It was like a succession of small changes. Like God has led you in a radically new way. But at no point along there was it like, okay, now we're just taking a 90 degree,
That's
right?
True.
Like
That's
it's just
true.
been, and so God has been like adjusting your course.
Very true. Very true.
For a while.
Mm-hmm.
Let me say, for those of you that are in huddle, you're like, yeah, learning circle, got it. If you're only experienced on the D team so far, I'm going to get you in huddle eventually. But if your experience is stride, then remember the learning circle is in the stride orientation materials. So if you go to whitewatercrossing.org/stride and look at the whiteboard video that's there, you can brush up on the learning circle. Stride and huddle have a lot of similarities, both in the way we read scripture and in the way that we process through the learning circle. So either way, that stuff is stuff that you're doing. All right, well. Chriss, that was awesome, but then you weren't content just to like store up these treasures for yourself. You went and led a huddle.
I did,
and I think it was for you what it was for me, and that was I got more out of leading my huddle than anybody who was in it.
That's probably true for me as well. I've always found that whenever you have to teach something, you learn it even better. Mm-hmm. So. Not just spending time in the Word for me, but spending time in the Word and spending time learning the tools of huddle for other people was, again, is just life-altering, being able to have those tools in my tool belt and sharpen my skills in those areas. So just an amazing experience leading huddle, even more so than being in a huddle.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I would love for you to think about as you're diving into your week is if, so last week we talked about the 4 soils, right? And next week I've got an amazing video. It's amazing. I love it. And it's gonna bend your noodle. It's that gentleman from India, I believe. So he's got a slight accent. But there's this question of bearing fruit. And so God has not put stuff in you just so that you can soak it up and be like, man, now I'm doing really good. Like I am super Christian now. God has invested in you and I invested in you and you have invested in other people and God has invested in you and other people. I'm not saying I'm the only one.
Right.
It's not just me. But we, all the way from the beginning of Scripture, we can find this narrative all the way through that the people of God are blessed to be a blessing. And so God has put something in you as a deposit, right? We see this kind of thing all the time in Jesus' parables, right? God has made a deposit in you, and he wants that deposit to bear a return. Or he has planted a seed in you. He wants that seed to bear fruit. And so I think my big challenge for you is just thinking about both as as we talked about last week, as we look at the week ahead. What is God doing in you to bear fruit, and what would that fruit look like? Not just fruit internally, like I'm more. And I have to say, like, I've known you for 3 years now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, more than that, but
sure,
but well for 3 years. And I am consistently challenged by your faith and by your just steadfast love of God. I'm like, man, I have to lead Chriss, I have to step my game up because he challenges me to be a better follower of Jesus. So I love that about you. But I see the fruit that you're bearing in the investments that you're making in other people, and even career-wise, some stuff that might be changing.
Yeah.
So it's exciting. So
it is.
That's it. Happy Monday, everybody. Hope you have a great, great week, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye.